Today, we're going to critique one of the most famous artists of the late 19th century. Let's go. Welcome back, guys. Cody here with Founts Atelier. As I said, we're going to take a look at one of the most famous and accomplished artists of the 19th century, John Singer Sargent. But before we do that, I've got a bone to pick. I've been looking at my metrics and I noticed that only about 5% of my viewers are actually subscribed to my channel. If you don't want to miss more helpful content like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and bell notification so you know when new videos are available. All right, back to John Singer Sargent. Now, if you like representational art, there's a pretty good chance you already know who I'm talking about, but if not, let me fill you in. Sargent was an expat American artist, which just means that he had American parents, but he was born and raised in Europe. His prime creative years were roughly between 1879 and the 1910s, and he died in 1925 at the age of 69. Sargent is best known for his portrait work of the social elite in both Europe and America, and he rubbed elbows with some of the most important people, artists, and celebrities of the time. Today, his work is shown in museums all around the world. So that gets us to our question. What made him so good? Why is he held on such a high pedestal by so many artists today? Well, let's dive in. Now, I'm hoping to do a whole series of artist critiques like this. So if you have artists at the top of your head that you would like me to kind of take a deep dive into their work and do an evaluation of them, let me know in the comments below. When I evaluate artwork, I'm always looking for three things. Number one, how well the piece is technically executed. Number two, how well the piece is designed or composed. And number three, what is the conceptual meaning behind the piece? In this critique, we are going to study three paintings of Sargent's. We're going to look at The Daughters of Edward Darley Boyd from 1882, Lady Agnew of Lochnaw from 1893, and Muddy Alligators from 1917. The first two paintings are really good examples of the portrait work that he was best known for, and the final piece is representative of the type of work he did toward the end of his life. So we're going to kind of get a good mixture from throughout his career. Now, this is way too much info to pack into one video, so for brevity's sake, I'm going to actually split this critique up into a 3-video series. First, today, we're going to take a look at the execution of his pieces. Now, as far as his technique goes, Sargent was primarily an oil painter. Growing up in Italy, he was actually born in Florence, he was surrounded by incredible artwork, and there is no doubt that it had a big influence on his work. He studied in the atelier of a young rising star artist at the time, Carlos Duran, as well as the École des Beaux-Arts. So he received both an academic training as well as training in more modern approaches. This is why, technically speaking, when you look at his work, it has the kind of accurate drawing and preciseness of an academic style piece, but it has some of the brushwork and expressiveness and fluidity that was common at the time with the Impressionists, who were just starting to get popular. This can easily be seen in our first painting, Daughters of Edward Darley Boyd. In this early painting, we can see that he definitely has the ability to do portrait work, which, trust me, is really challenging. Without seeing these girls in person or knowing them, you can just tell that he's captured their likeness. The scene is lit with natural light coming in from the left, giving the colors a fairly clean, less saturated feel. The whole painting is fairly dull color-wise. Unlike some of the Impressionists, who people were really starting to like at the time, Sargent incorporated a lot more dark values and black into his work, which gives things a great sense of dimension and structure and really adds to the moodiness of the piece. I mean, look at the background and how dark that is. When we zoom into his brushwork, it really shines. Look at the big, juicy brush strokes right here. It feels like he just plopped the paint down on the canvas and left it alone for the most part. A lot of his paintings look this way, kind of like they're just one paint stroke and then he was done. Even the girls' faces are really simple. He was great at not overworking his subjects, which is a common problem among most artists. Even the most complex design on the vase has been simplified to just a few splotches of paint. It's interesting because we talk a lot about this in the studio, about creating the sense of detail without there actually being a lot. And Sargent was really good at that. The loose brush handling would be a hallmark of his style and kept his paintings looking really fresh and vibrant, even if bright colors weren't being used all that often. In Lady Agnew, we see the same type of thing, just in a much lighter value key. As is the case with fabric in many of his paintings, his loose brushwork gives a ton of movement and flow to the piece. It is remarkable how he creates so many textures, from the satin ribbon to the upholstered chair to the illusion of sheer fabric on her sleeve. Sargent was also a master at edge work. You'll notice in several spots in this painting where the edge of an object just vanishes. One good example is the area to the left of her neck. Notice how the edge of her neck and shoulder just kind of disappear into the color and value of the chair. I find that oftentimes students just learning to paint really have a desire and want to outline everything. And I think that comes from pencil drawing when we're kids or something. But they have a tendency to want to define those edges, when sometimes it's much more effective and realistic, even though it seems counterintuitive, to have a variety of edges in a piece. And even lost edges like the one that we see here. Finally, let's look at a different type of painting. As his career progressed into the 20th century, Sargent started to become a little burned out doing so many portraits, and he began to focus on other subject matter, primarily landscapes. Now, landscapes, in fact, were one of his early loves. Some of his very first paintings that are shown in museums, that type of thing, were actually seascapes and landscapes. So that's kind of interesting. As he got older, he did more and more portrait work because that's what he was good at, and that's what paid the bills, essentially, and made him famous. So as he got later into his career, he started to do more and more watercolor paintings, such as this one called Muddy Alligators. Now, taking a set of watercolors out and whatnot was a little bit easier than packing up your whole oil set. Now, if you know anything about watercolor, you know that it can be really difficult to kind of control it and handle it. The paint has a life of its own, and you just have to balance letting it do its own thing versus controlling it yourself. That being said, as you look at the painting, it is obvious the Sargent was a master at it. He makes it look so easy, switching from wet-on-wet techniques to dry brush techniques seamlessly. In doing so, he captures all the textures brilliantly, from the dry grass to the reflections on the water and even the kind of rough texture of the alligator scales. He also does an incredible job at managing his color temperatures. Notice how he is playing with both this bluish violet color and the warm tones right next to each other to really great effect. I especially like how he kind of just let the white of the paper come through on the main alligator's back, just adding a few little brush strokes for the scales. And this really gives the feel of light really streaming down and bouncing off of that alligator. All of this is really difficult to do with watercolor and keep it from becoming a muddy mess. It really demonstrates him as a technical master at his craft. Well, there is so much more we could discuss, but we'll stop for now. Make sure you check out the second video in this series to learn more about how Sargent used composition and design to create an impact on the viewer. If you found this video helpful and learned a thing or two, make sure you hit that like button and share it with a friend. Until next time,